Welcome, everybody. My name is Kim Emery, and I am the chaplain here at ACH, and we welcome you today to our podcast. We're very excited about the topic that we're going to share with you today. We have several folks here from all different parts of our organization to share in a conversation about how we improve outcomes for our LGBT youth and the families that we serve here in Fort Worth. And throughout many other parts of the counties surrounding us. And they are Sean Allen, Angela Lewis, Rene Rodriguez, and Sharon So. What I would like to do, though, just as we get started today, I think we would be remiss if we don't take a moment to recognize the events of the last couple of weeks that have been going on, not just in our own community, but throughout the country, that have left many of us that are involved in some way in caring for children and families a little bit brokenhearted, angered, and upset in many different ways. So a whole flood of emotions around that. But we know that that's a response to the injustices and the inequalities that still remain, so obviously remain in the areas that we serve and in most of the communities in which we live. So we want to be respectful of those who have, in many ways, given us a wake-up call. You know, people like Mr. Floyd, people like Mr. Brooks, and even here in our own nearby Dallas community, Mr. Botham Jean, and many others like them. We hope that what their lives and the legacy they leave behind is to awaken us to the kind of awareness we need so that these things don't continue to happen in our society. And so that's important to us here, particularly in this conversation, because those type of situations are what really brought the awareness to us that we need to address this topic, and it's very, very important. So I want to make sure that we just are mindful as we go along that these are still issues that many of the youth we serve, particularly in the LGBT community, face day to day, every day in their lives. So we wanted to take a moment and just be respectful about that. And that there are many ways in which the issues that we see around racism and many other things intersect in a very real way with the kind of conversation we're going to have today. So thank you for joining us. I want to take a minute to let our panelists introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do or how they came to join us here in this work at ACH. Sharon, would you like to start us off?
Yes, of course. My name is Sharon So. I'm the clinical manager for the Youth Emergency Shelter here at ACH, and I have been with ACH for a total of nearly 4 years. So at the Youth Emergency Shelter, I oversee the intakes and discharges, as well as the services that are provided to the youth during their stay here. So I really oversee the processes to make sure that our services accommodate that population, and I have the pleasure and honor of being able to be that frontline person of knowing what brought them to the shelter to begin with. So we hear about the discrimination, the family conflict that they struggle with, and so we know how to accommodate that specific child and their needs during their stay here, and it's my responsibility to make sure my team discharges them back to a safe and stable environment with their family or with a safe adult that they've identified. So I have a really fun role here at the shelter, and I'm honored to be on the panel.
Thank you, Sharon. We appreciate that. And Angela Lewis, would you please introduce yourself to us?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim. My name is Angela Lewis. I am one of the trainers here at ACH. I train new employees that come in to the agency, and I also do refresher trainings, which are a little more in depth than the orientation trainings. I've been with the agency about 8 years now, and I've held various roles, including in the emergency youth shelter. I ran the Safe Place program for about 4.5 years. So I've had a lot of exposure with the LGBT community, even personal experience. I myself am a out and proud lesbian. I have been for about 25 years. So that's given me somewhat of a leg up in assisting these youth that may be struggling with their identity.
Thank you, Angela.
Absolutely.
And Rene, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, Kim. So my name is Rene Rodriguez, and I'm the foster care and adoption, family engagement, and placement supervisor. So I have a really cool job, I think. I've been working in child welfare for about 10 years now, and I worked in the investigations of CPS for quite some time in the child death unit. At that time, I saw a lot of crying, a lot of just sadness. So when I transitioned to here at ACH, and what my job is to find foster parents, good quality foster parents and adoptive parents that can care for kiddos that are in foster care in the foster care system, or that are ready to be adopted. So I've come to a place where I see a lot more smiles now. And the reason this subject and this topic is so important to me is because I also identify as LGBT, but we have so many kiddos in care, and so many of our LGBTQ couples don't feel that sometimes the system is allowed for them to adopt or foster. I want them to know that they can, because our kiddos need the love, and our LGBT couples provide that love for our families. And once again, more smiles.
Absolutely. What a great aspect of your job, Renee. That's fabulous. Great. Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Sean Allen.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I am not myself LGBT, but I'm a longtime ally. I've been working for ACH since 2011, when we first started our LGBTQ committee at ACH. And I'd be happy to tell you more about that in a little while.
So thank you to all my panelists. I know that everybody is very excited to present some information and perspective on the work we're doing here with LGBT kids and youth. But I want to clarify what it is we mean when we say LGBT, because we use those letters often and we hear that maybe out in the larger culture often. But what LGBT includes is a community of people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And so we touch on different issues with different youth depending on where their needs are and how they identify themselves. But I thought it was worth a pause to just clarify what those letters mean if you're not as familiar as maybe some of us who work daily with youth and families. One thing I would like to say is that our focus here at ACH with LGBT issues is really all about improving outcomes for the youth that come to us that identify as part of this community. And that's really important to us because what we know and what we have done a lot of work on is researching what we can know about LGBTQ youth. And so what we do know about the youth from that community that come to us is that they're way overrepresented in our population here at ACH. And that's for a variety of reasons. But just to give you a little information so that you can kind of begin to paint a picture about what we know working with LGBT youth, is that about 20 to 40% of the homeless population identify in some way as LGBT. That's a pretty large number. So maybe they were not welcome at home anymore because they identified themselves in that way, and that's not an unusual circumstance that we find here at ACH. So let me give you some numbers, and I think the numbers are significant because the numbers that I'm about to share with you are what really drew me as a chaplain or a spiritual care specialist into working on this particular issue and with this particular population of kids. What we know is that LGBTQ youth are at much higher risk for bad outcomes, and significantly bad outcomes. So highly rejected LGBT youth are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide at least once in their lifetime. We also know that highly rejected LGBT youth are 3 times more likely to become HIV positive or at risk for other STDs. They are also 3 times more likely to self-medicate using illegal substances. Those numbers are really significant. And those numbers, honestly, when I first came, I'm not LGBT myself, but as I began to do work as a spiritual care specialist, I started realizing a pattern that a lot of those kids that identified as LGBT experienced a lot of what we would call spiritual struggle. And so that's kind of what drew me into working with these kids. Because spirituality in many ways is about identity, it's about belonging, it's about feeling worthy of love, care, and support. And so many of our kids struggle in those areas. And so those are areas in many ways that I felt I could maybe help them get to a better place so that the risk of those numbers I just shared with you is not so high. The good news and where the hope is, and here at ACH, we're always looking at where the hope is. To be able to give that in some way or share it with our kids, is that there are still very simple things we can be doing to significantly lower those risks. And I want to share some of those numbers with you before we begin the conversation, just to kind of set the table a little bit. So what we know is that even a small reduction in rejecting behaviors lowers those risks, not by a little, but by a whole lot. Reducing rejection behaviors even a little bit lowers the suicidal possibility by about 75%, which is very significant. Reducing rejecting behaviors even down to a moderate level lowers their risk of HIV or substance abuse in half. And because of that, we know now that there are simple things that we can be doing to affirm them and who they are and eliminate some of those risks for them so that they can have a brighter future. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on numbers. I would rather have some conversation from folks on our panel that experience connection with the youth that we're talking about in the LGBT community every day. So I'd like to invite them into the conversation as we start talking a little bit more about how we actually care for these youth, and also the families that they come with, or the families that they need to find for themselves. So Sharon and Angela, you two are direct care staff, have been direct care staff for many years. So could you maybe just share what you know a little bit more in depth about what some situations in which maybe the LGBT youth that come to us seeking services, what maybe they would experience when they come seeking services with us? And Sharon, maybe because you're at the shelter day to day, you might have a very bird's eye view on that.
Yes. So the most common situation that we see is family conflict. And a lot of runaways and a lot of homeless LGBTQ youth come to us is rooted in that family conflict. My parents don't understand. My parents aren't going to accept me. You know, Kim, like you talked about, teens already struggle with, not even just teens, but kids in general already struggle with self-identity issues growing up. But then you add that family conflict on top of that with their parents who they feel that, you know, they should be loved the most by their parents. Then suddenly, you know, there's this conflict, and it's not that the parents don't love them anymore, but the child definitely feels that way, right? They lose that sense of belonging, that self-worth of being able to feel loved by their family. So we see a lot of teens run away from home, and we find them through Safe Place, which I know Angela can talk more about since she was really the Safe Place guru for so long. And a lot of kids who come here end up here because of that, or just because parents kicked them out because they didn't agree with how they self-identified. So I would say those are the two most common situations we see most frequently through the shelter.
Okay. And Angela, you're now a guru. You didn't know that before.
I know. I've been called guru forever, Safe Place expert. I mean,
yes.
I'm good with it following me the rest of my life. It's an amazing program. So yeah. But yeah, to piggyback off of what Sharon was saying, I think that it's important to realize the whole family is going through, right? Because particularly in my program, I mainly dealt with the kids by themselves. So sometimes it was easy to just focus on what the youth was feeling and not what the family may be going through as a whole. There was one time that I had a family, and it broke my heart because the mother said, you know, I have a vision of what my kid's life should be like. And it's almost like the death of my child, because now I'm going to have to reinvent how I see and hope for what my child will have in life. So you have to understand the family as a whole. And I think that's important. That goes all to our mission, protect children, but also to preserve families. So I think that's something that we focus on very well here at ACH. And, you know, we do have some that come in and as if they're not lost enough, they're homeless. So how horrible is that? I even had a youth come in one time through Safe Place, and she didn't have any shoes on. She came into our welcome center, and we started talking. She identified as a lesbian, so we connected on that level. We chatted about that for a while, and then I was like, "Where's your shoes? Do you prefer to be shoeless, or is this a preference?" And she was like, you know what? I've been out on the streets for 3 months now. I came across a man, his feet looked terrible, and I gave him my shoes, and I was like, I love this child. I mean, she's already going through what she's going through, and she still had the heart to give this man her shoes. So there's some amazing kids out there in the community, and I'm glad that we're here to help them instill that confidence that they are lacking, and also give them that support. I think that's the number one key, is to know that someone supports them, and that they're not being judged. So that's something that we definitely instill here at the agency.
A big part of what we do here at ACH is try to empower them, right? We want to empower them, and to be empowered, you have to feel worthy, welcome, loved, cared for. And yeah, it is amazing that some of these kids are giving out of what they don't have to be that generous. Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, before I kind of move too far away from this, what are some just practical ways in which, the shelter or safe place, or once a kiddo comes onto our campus, what are some ways in which we indicate to them that we are a safe place? Because, that's not something an LGBT youth can take for granted, right? I want people to know that there are some very specific indicators that we are welcoming and not rejecting. And I think putting that clarity to it for the audience we serve, we can say this all day, but what does it sound like or look like to a kid when they come on board? Because those are the things that change the statistics, right? So what are some just practical ways in which we show them that, that we do care and we are willing to receive them as they are?
I can speak to that a little bit. It's something we've talked a lot about as an organization. We talk about, do we put up rainbow flags? Do we put up symbols? So young people who generally have experienced rejection from other social institutions, other helping institutions, are going to be skeptical, right? So when they show up looking for safety, if they show up, that's the first question, is do they even come to us? So our reputation is the first thing that matters. Are we a safe place? What is the word on the street? And to the extent that they're willing to come in the door, then they're going to be laying eyes on the environment. They're going to be looking at the people. They're going to look for those symbols, rainbows or other symbols. But even more than that, they're just watching the authority figures, and how do the authority figures negotiate language? Are they comfortable saying the letters LGBT, right? These kind of subtle cues that kids pick up on tell them to what extent this is a safe environment for them to reveal their true selves, or be willing to open themselves up to us and tell us what's going on in their life so that we can help them.
Yeah, I building trust is something we all are conscious of in whatever capacity we serve here, and yeah, sometimes if we aren't part of the LGBT community, we may not realize that that's not something they can take for granted. Anything you could add to that, Rene, as somebody who works on with families an awful lot as well?
Absolutely. The way with foster families and foster kiddos that come into care, it's a little different than when they come into the shelter, because when it's a foster care situation and we need a home immediately, it's more an emergency type. We get a call at 3 a.m. We've got 2 kiddos. So we really don't know much about the kid. We may know ethnicity, gender, age, and that's it. For example, this morning we just placed 2 kiddos and we don't even know their names. So it's female and male at this point. So with that, I'm saying that we don't know if they identify as LGBT, but once we foster a relationship with the foster kiddo, what we do is we get our case managers try to get as comfortable as possible with them, so that if they do identify, then we can start making sure that kiddo feels comfortable, safe in the home. And if it's a foster family that just isn't educated when it comes to LGBT issues or how to deal with that or how to support, then we as an agency step in immediately and we outline, this is what can be done. These are the services that we can provide. These are the services that are available, so that that child does feel comfortable and home and loved in that home.
Yeah, well, that's the big thing we want to offer, right? A loving environment, because that's what creates some healing from the trauma that they all bring to us, right? Yeah. And I would like to kind of expand on that a little bit, Rene. It sounds like part of what you do with families is certainly provide some education about how best to care for some of our LGBT kids. Is there someone here that would like to, I know Sean, you were one of the first to implement some training here for not just staff that work directly with our kids, hands-on, but throughout our organization. Can somebody speak to maybe how we are conscientious about providing education to our own people about caring for LGBT kids?
Let me take us back a little bit in time. So give us a little history lesson back to 2011. And if you can think back to that time, this was before gay marriage. This is before, I should say, a national gay marriage. That was sort of the divisive issue of the time. And it was really driving a lot of the conversation at the time. There was a lot of social agitation nationally. So really there were three converging factors that came together that really brought LGBT issues to light for us and made us realize that we needed to develop a training, that we needed to focus on our staff competencies when it comes to working with diverse populations, including LGBT. I said there are three converging factors. So one of those was the societal change that was happening across the country that was really driving the conversation. The other thing is we received some very specific feedback from the community. We had a prominent LGBT leader in our community who was a city councilman, Joel Burns, who told us that we didn't have a good reputation among LGBT youth at that time. The word on the street was, don't go to the shelter at ACH. It's not a safe place. So when we received that feedback, that was really a call to action for us. So that was definitely an important motivator for us, because we wanted to create, our whole mission is to create a safe place for people. So we really took that feedback to heart and set about creating a culture change within our organization to address that. The third factor was cultural competency movement, which was really gaining speed within the child serving community that we work with. So through our partnerships with Mental Health Connection and other organizations in the community, we brought in a 4-day training for our staff, which was really focused on this idea of cultural competency. And so that's the idea that our staff, in order to help our clients, the diverse population we serve, that we need to be able to understand and relate to them, to be able to intervene appropriately. So the culture is important. So it addressed the culture of poverty, culture around race, was probably the focus of that training. And then it touched on LGBT. So the interesting thing was, at the end of that 4-day training, we did a survey of the participants, and we asked them, of the different populations that you work with, who are the ones you feel most equipped or best equipped to work with, and which are the ones you feel least equipped? So guess which issue rose to the top, or I should say fell to the bottom, is LGBT youth. So the staff at ACH, as well as in other child serving organizations, consistently identified the LGBT population as the one that they felt most challenged by. They didn't know enough to be effective. And so really those three factors together, the societal change, the cultural competency work in our community, and then that specific feedback we received, those three things created a perfect storm that came together and really drove our action at ACH. So we formed a work group, we studied the issues, we came up with specific recommendations. We really went through a very deliberate culture change as an organization in order to improve outcomes for this population.
I'm hearing so much about how what we observed going on in the larger community brought us to this awareness, right? So we at ACH try to work in the community as partners. We don't get very far in a silo mentality, and so a lot of what's going on right now, even in our culture, impacts the day-to-day lives of our kids. And sometimes we forget about that, or we just don't realize it unless we're looking at one of those kids face to face, or we're hearing about them, or we come across information within our organization or on the larger community.
And Kim, I'd like to also talk about, in lieu of what Sean has said, I want to almost highlight how far the shelter has come, even in a matter of years, on how we accommodate the LGBTQ youth in our services specifically, and even in our structure. So something that I'm very proud of working at the shelter is that we've dedicated 2 single rooms specifically to be gender neutral for this population, so that when they come into the shelter, they have their own space, right? It doesn't have to be, well, I'm biologically this, but I identify as this. There's no question about it. You get your own room. You get to be who you are. And when we first formulate that relationship, we start right off the bat. So as soon as they come into the shelter, we do an intake, and we ask for sexual orientation, and we then know how we need to accommodate. So our staff are really good about asking about what pronoun they would like to go by, right? And these are questions that these kids who come to us specifically probably have rarely heard from their caregivers, right? They've never been asked for their preference, right? You're just going to be what I tell you. And I think we've had so many success stories at the shelter of kids saying, I want to stay here longer. I feel loved. I feel cared for. I love that staff are open about how I feel about who I am. And even our questioning youth of, you know, I wasn't really sure where I stood when I came in, but now I know I can fully be who I want to be. And I think those are the stories that really keep us going in this light. And even when it comes to groups and anything service related, we really allow them to identify who they want to be. So if they want to go into, you know, let's say we have a male who identifies as a female and they want to go into a specific girls group, we allow them to do so, right? We allow them to explore who they want to be. And that is what drives our services and our staff and myself personally to really make sure our services are accommodating to this population, because I've seen the smiles at the end of the day. And so that's something I would love to highlight at the shelter, of just how far we have really come over a matter of years.
Sharon, thank you for saying that. It really has been a remarkable transformation and change over the years, to the extent that that person who originally gave us that critical feedback a few years later was giving a keynote presentation at a homeless conference in which he featured ACH as being a model for working with LGBT youth.
So those are some incredibly wonderful examples of how we have implemented real change that we really believe affects how kids respond to us and allow us to give them the care that they come to us needing. I had spoken before about what rejecting behaviors can result in terms of the higher levels of risk. We really work hard with staff to address so that they are equipped with what they need to know.
I'd be glad to speak to that. When we talk about LGBT rejecting behaviors, those are the ones that you were indicating are associated with bad outcomes. What we're really talking about are certain behaviors we want our staff to avoid. So in our training, we talk about this, so examples of rejecting behaviors would be use of derogatory language, right? So we really made a decision that across the whole organization, we wanted to eliminate rejecting behaviors. So using derogatory language, blocking access to resources or friends, or other examples of rejecting behaviors, religious condemnation, telling somebody that they're going to go to hell because they're LGBT. So those are some specific examples. There's many more, including silence. We need to have the same dialogue to talk about racial inequity in our outcomes. I think that sums up why the rejecting behaviors are so important and why we focused on that. It gave our staff something specific that we expected. So a lot of our cultural competency training is about what not to do, as well as, you know, understanding the basics of the culture and the lingo. But we really want our staff to know, here's a list of behaviors that we don't tolerate. These are not okay at a child serving organization where so many of the youth we serve are LGBT.
What does a LGBT kid come to us needing most from us when they step foot on our campus, if they even are just thinking about seeking help?
What I would add to that, I guess, is that we as an organization had to make a decision about where we want to be on the spectrum, from rejection on one end, acceptance in the middle, and celebration at the other end. Our expectation of staff, regardless of their personal values, is we want everyone to be accepting. And I should add that when we say accepting, that goes beyond tolerance. You know, the word tolerance implies that you can be here, but and we tolerate you, but we don't necessarily like having you here, right? So acceptance goes beyond that. Acceptance is we see you for who you are, we acknowledge you, we affirm you, and you're welcome.
The power of that for healing, trauma in particular, is something we're really focused on here at ACH. I'm wondering if anybody could maybe speak to what does acceptance look like with kids that we serve, because that's something that I think all of us have a human need for, connection and belonging and a sense that, you know, we are okay as people.
I can speak to that when it comes to foster care and adoption. When I spoke earlier about that, we don't know how they identify when they come in, but when they do, we have a really strict and rigorous process in which we evaluate all of our families that come to us. And before it was about let's get families in here. We have a lot of kids, but now we really need to focus, and we have been really stressing that we need to focus on quality families, because what would happen before is families that, so I'll take them, I'll tolerate them if they're gay. Um, we don't want that. What we want is accepting. You may not understand it. You may need some education or resources, but what we need is kiddos that are going to feel accepted in the home. And if you're not going to be a family that accepts a kiddo in the home, then quite frankly, you're going to cause more trauma to the child in that manner. So you need to find another agency. Is basically what we've done. We've got to know, because these kiddos have been rejected for so long with different agencies, different families. Our families at ACH, we don't do that. We accept the kid. We show them the love. And even if it's for a limited amount of time that they're in a foster home, during that time, we're giving that child the tools necessary to be able to deal with that trauma, and then use those tools later to be able to attach appropriately with other people. And then when it comes to our adoptive families, our adoptive kiddos, we also want them to know they're going to be accepted throughout their whole lives, that they're going to get a forever family, and that even if they were to come out at the age of 18, 19, that they're going to be accepted. So that's what our focus is making sure that those families accept, not just tolerate.
And that's something we value very deeply here. Is the core of everything we do at ACH, right? We're big believers in the fact that being loved and cared for can heal a lot of the wounds, at least to the degree that we are willing to meet them where they are. And I've seen that a great deal in my work. You know, as a spiritual care specialist, I often work with kids who feel like they are not good enough. They are not good enough for their family. They are not good enough for society. They are not good enough for God. And so they've received these messages so often that it's created a really painful wound inside of them that really only love can address. So I'm totally on board with the idea of being accepting instead of just tolerating. And I think most people of faith, whatever brand of faith you subscribe to, know that tolerance is not enough. Loving people, caring for people, that's what's healing, and that's something that all of us need. And I speak to that an awful lot with a lot of the kids that I meet face to face, day in and day out.
So I think that feeds into how do we get people educated enough, right? Because the basis of rejection is fear. When we reject someone, it's fear, it's not knowing. And I think that's where our training department focuses in on how important our cultural diversity trainings are and how important our advanced LGBT trainings are to address these issues, you know, and to offer our employees as well a safe space to have these conversations where they won't be judged themselves, but to kind of process through with them, you know, why if they have any type of rejection behaviors or things like that, because we want that addressed before they get into assisting our families and youth.
Sharon, is there something working in the shelter where you're with these kids day to day and the staff that work with them day to day? Any more you could add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say along the lines of acceptance is one thing I've noticed, and it's continuously sad, is how quick a child can go from feeling loved and feeling cared for to how quickly they'll move to no one cares about me anymore, no one loves me anymore, over the simple fact. And I think that really hits a human chord is why they go to that extreme so quickly. And so something we've seen and something our staff are really good about is formulating that rapport, building that trust, building that relationship as soon as they come into the shelter, and knowing, hey, we care about you regardless of how you present, right? We care about you as a human, as a child. We're here to care for you. And taking on that caregiver role to these kids really shines a light that not all people are the same. There are people that genuinely care about that child. And it's our job at the shelter, I believe, when they come through our doors, to show them that your one experience does not define everyone else in the world. And you are worthy of being loved. You are worthy of being cared for. And you are most definitely worthy of being who you want to be. And people will love you regardless of how they think others feel about them, right? And so I've seen a drastic change in the kids from the start of their stay here at the shelter to the time that they have to leave us, and the outcomes are always better. And we do a lot of family mediation here at the shelter. Our counselors are really good about meeting with the families or identifying a safe adult for that child, so that when they go back to a home environment, that it's one that they are either going back improved, right? Or it's one that is a safer one or a more loved one that they came from when they came to us.
I'm also mindful as you talk about the work you do with families and helping to bridge either miscommunication or lack of education with families, that there are other organizations that we've partnered with in many ways out in the community to help us do that once they step out of our doors, right?
Well, a couple of organizations I can point to that have been very important in our work and helped us in our journey are PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and we have a youth group in our community, LGBTQ Saves, both of which have been really good partners with ACH, and we send referrals to one another. They have a relationship with our shelter, and they sometimes participate in our training, and they certainly helped us develop the training. Before we unleashed the training on our staff, we tested it with LGBT youth in the community, got their feedback, and we also recruited some of them to help us deliver the training. So those are two organizations that are very important that I would point to. There are also some LGBT affirming churches in our community that have been closely aligned with our work.
So an important resource that we have internally is our ARIS department, and that stands for Assessment, Intervention, and Referral Services. It's a lovely group of callers. They're typically the hub of our agency, so whenever you call to our agency, they're going to be one of the first people that you come into contact with. And the importance for them with this particular conversation is they have many, many LGBT resources throughout the community, even outside of the community if you're not located locally. And that's how our agency partners with these other community agencies. They get on our list and we're able to refer out if it's not something that we can offer internally. We can definitely get families and youth to services that they need, regardless of the situation. So I think that partnering with these referral sources only builds the web.
I think, Angela, that just sort of helps us better understand that we work within a whole larger community, right? We're one piece, but we try to offer our families other options, right, of other resources that are doing wonderful work that could be support for them as well out in the larger community, which is important to us. And part of why that's really important to us is because when we first started doing some of this work, some of those resources were resources to us and remain that way. Sean spoke a little bit about that when he talked about PFLAG as well. So what I would like to do is introduce this this idea that many people, and even as I kind of go about as a chaplain, I get to touch base with people throughout the organization day to day, and we still have a lot of our own staff that don't know. We have an LGBT work group that's very functional and very active within our organization. The reason that work group exists is really simple. We exist to ensure that we as ACH are a welcoming place for youth, families, and staff that are part of our family too.
We really did, as I mentioned earlier, begin this work back in 2011. And one of the first things we did was we formed a work group that really had two purposes at that point in time. First purpose was to research, to read the research and understand how many LGBT youth we are serving, what are the things that matter for outcomes, and what can we do to be a more supportive organization of LGBT youth. And then the second thing that work group was charged with doing was making some specific recommendations for the organization. Now, the composition of that work group, who was involved with it, so this was all ACH staff. And at this time, when we were first talking about it, we were very deliberate in inviting people to be on that committee. It was very important to have a diverse group. So we wanted diversity in terms of structure within the organization. We wanted people who were working in the trenches with clients on the front lines. We wanted some administrators. We wanted some executives, directors. And then we also wanted diversity in terms of LGBT. Even though we had such a diversity of people with different belief systems, we could all agree that we wanted good outcomes for kids. And so really the outcome focus, I think, was very critical to us being able to move forward, to be able to say that these are some specific things that we can do as an organization that will improve outcomes. And so, you know, we aren't asking our staff to change their personal beliefs, but we are asking them as part of their professional obligation to embrace our organizational values, which are about love and affirming our youth. So that's how it really started. Now, that was a long time ago. A lot has changed since then. So the committee today is more specifically work-oriented, right? We're trying to do some specific things to move the needle. So one of the big things that we're working on this year is getting some outside recognition for our work. So we're trying to get a stamp of approval from HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, that provides an all families, all children, all families, excuse me. It's like a recognition, a certification, where they'll come in and look at our policies and practices, look at all of the things we're doing, and if we meet certain standards, then we can get different levels of recognition. So we're actively pursuing that right now. That's one of the activities our committee is working on. We have others as well that perhaps Rene can tell us about.
Absolutely. I think with the history of ACH and some of the sentiment around us being called all church home formally, many of our LGBT couples in the community didn't feel that this was a safe place for them. Just like our kiddos didn't feel they could come to the shelter, our LGBTQ couples did not feel this was a safe place. And we've been working very, very hard to change that. And we want our families to know that we are here to support them. In fact, this year, our adoptive parents of the year are a same-sex couple who adopted 3 most beautiful little kids that needed a forever home, and they're going to be featured on our website. They're going to be featured on different media that we are going to put out, because we want people to know that we are accepting, we love you, we need kids, we have kiddos, who need love from families. It doesn't matter what the family looks like. So our call to action in the past few years has been, let's get the word out that we are here for you. Now, the thing I want to stress is that we are very accepting, and we do accept any type of family, and whatever that may look like. And we're going to help you navigate through that so that you can be successful in fostering and also adopting a kid and providing that kid, whether they be LGBT or not, with a forever home. And also, the call to action is for foster parents who are out there who really do understand the trauma that our LGBT kiddos go through. We have many families right now, dozens, that have specifically come to us because they know, listen, they're going to help us, they're going to educate us, and we are here. If there's LGBT kid, they have preferences, and they can say, we would really, really like an LGBT kid that has been rejected to be in our home, because we're, even though we may not be LGBT, but we're allies, we are going to be a family, we're going to provide love to a kiddo. So we have those families that are wanting to come to us just because of that, and we welcome them. Come one, come all, we need you, because there are too many kids out there in our foster care system that don't have a loving family. And whatever that family looks like, we welcome them here, especially if you're going to provide acceptance and love for our kids.
It just makes us smile, right? When we think about being able to provide an environment where not just the kids feel accepted, but any families that may want to come and be able to offer a loving, safe place for these kids to call home, because it's so elemental to, to who we are as people. We all want to have a home, and home is where we're safe and we're loved, and people see the best in us. And I like to think, as I go around the organization, that people in our organization are very invested in making sure that kids have the message that they are loved and cared for. And so, we want everybody who's thinking about, if they even ever thought about, providing a home for some of these kids, talk to us, right, Rene? There are a million ways to get a hold of us. And we do a good job, I believe, of giving parents the support that they need. It's difficult to parent. It's very difficult sometimes to parent kids who have been through so much trauma, but there are resources available here. And particularly for our LGBT kids. And we've worked very hard at that, because we know that sometimes they have been neglected in getting the services that they've needed, or they just don't feel that they deserve them.
So if you want to be a foster or adoptive parent and you want to be the difference in the life of one of these kiddos, we are going to provide the website link in our show notes, or you can also call us at 817-886-7140, or you can email us at recruitment@achservices.org. Any of those will be a possibility for you to be able to talk to someone that can walk you through the whole process of becoming one of our parents that cares for our kiddos.
Thank you, Rene. And I want to thank all of our panelists today for joining us in this conversation, and for doing the kind of work you do to be able to make a difference in the life of a kid. That's what we're all about here at ACH. I also want to thank our producer, Kristen Victorin, who has helped us put all of this together.
Well, we really want to thank Kim Emery for hosting this entire episode. We really appreciate your input and your guidance in facilitating this discussion. And this discussion is a part of our Community Conversations podcast, which is brought to you by ACH Child and Family Services. If you like what you're hearing, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And you can advocate for the children in our community by telling a friend about this podcast. We'll catch you next time on Community Conversations.
Yay!
Hallelujah.
Now again, from the top.
That's all we got, Sean. That's all we got.